when you're in survival mode, right? Like whether it's trauma or otherwise, you don't have the capacity to think about other people. Like physiologically, and Shane, you can make that face, it is scientifically proven your brain does not have the capacity to consider another person's feelings because your survival is at stake in your brain, right?
I don't know because
It is.
he had a whole lot of other stuff available to him.
No,
So it wasn't survival.
no. So here's
That's
the thing,
me
right?
at
Like,
that point.
right. So like the brain is like a really fascinating thing, right? Like the way that it functions is truly like I don't know that we will ever understand it no matter how much time we have time to study it, right? The things it picks up that we can't on a conscious level is like absolutely phenomenal, right? Like two berries that look identical, somehow in your reptilian part of your brain, you will instinctively know what is poisonous and what is not, right? This idea of going for the good girl is also like this instinctive thing in a man to want to be attached to a woman who is not attached to 150 men.
Yep.
Right? Like there's this instinctive of like wanting, regardless of your intentions, right? Because survival, regardless of your intentions of what you're planning to do, you still want to be attracted to good women. And I think that's the part where a lot of women really struggle, right? Like just because you are a good woman does not necessarily mean that that man is going to see you as a wife if you are not moving as a wife, right? If you violate your own standards, your own ethics, your own moral code, you disqualify yourself. No matter how much you care about that man, no matter how amazing he presents himself to be, that like you need to have those standards for yourself. Yes, there are some men out there who are not in survival mode, who have the mental capacity to be like, you know what, I don't want to take responsibility of the repercussions of this and will remove themselves from the situation. However, like looking at the real world, when we look at jobs, when we look at family structures, when we look at trauma, when we look at like how intensive school can be, when we look at how competitive it is, when we look at like all of these factors, the majority of people, especially young adults, right, do not actually have the capacity to function in that thought process. They're not built like that, to the point where like science has actually determined the fact that like the human brain doesn't fully mature until the age of 24. How old are you in college?
Okay, so we're talking. I'm talking about
18 to
grown.
22.
Okay,
I was I was 17 when he first saw me, 18
no,
when we
I'm
met.
But like
talking.
that's
I'm
what I'm
not talking
getting.
about kids will do kid things. I'm talking about grown folk.
But again, like we talked about this like some time ago, right? Like the this like arrested development that people go through where mentally they stay at the age of the trauma that was inflicted on them. So you could be 42, but if your trauma was at 14, you have not emotionally mentally matured past that point, right? So like we're seeing like grown bodies and we're identifying them as like these fully functioning adults, but they haven't done the necessary work to be able to
That's
like
true.
function at the capacity of somebody else who's at their equivalent.
So let me
Yeah,
ask
but
you.
I also think part of it too is societal norms that encourage the behavior too. So if you have societal norms that encourages that behavior, there is no need to move forward beyond the trauma or whatever, because society is reinforcing the behavior as normalized. So
I agree with the societal norm. I think that has a great deal to do with it. But do we have to, if you're going to say that about manipulation on both sides, because there are women who manipulate men too, so it has to be the same grace. You know, the women who go out on dates and they don't have with men just to get a free meal, or the women who go out their man's pockets, or friend zones a guy just for what she can get out of him. They have to have the same grace because they're siblings. They grew up in the same household. So as long as we're extending that same grace, which I think is BS, I think at a certain age you need to grow up a little bit. You know when you're right and wrong.
But that's what I'm saying, Shane. Like people's perceptions of right and wrong are different based on their life experience.
that's true.
Right? Like that's the key point of what I'm saying. Like your brain determines right and wrong differently based on where your brain is stuck at. So like I agree, and like we've been on these panels often enough for you to know that like I hold the same grace for both genders and the same accountability for both genders. Like BS is BS, right? But I think if we're going to bring the human component back into it of like actual human beings, it makes a whole lot of sense that like people get stuck and people don't see the world the way that everybody else sees the world, especially when you're stuck in that whole fight, flight, freeze, and fawn stage, right? Like your brain has actually shut down so many critical parts of it in order to keep you surviving.
Yeah.
Didn't we talk about this before? Mistaken. These. Would you not agree with?
Say it again.
Didn't we talk about what
The cognitive dissonance? Yeah. Yep.
I want to add to that, and I want to look into the science about the brain fully developing, because that is pretty much true, but also too, your brain develops also based on experience. So it's going to be affected by that trauma, or because some people are saying now that Gen or Gen Z is, they're kind of coddled and they're kept safer, and they're doing things later on now. Like 18-year-olds are kind of functioning now at like as 14-year-olds.